Hi, everybody. Is it, can you hear me? Good morning. Welcome to the next session of our webinar
Morning, ma'am.
series. We got a scholar or a pedant. Pedant is the apt term for him, Dr. Rajesh Vinaya. And I want to say an important thing that our principal, Valentine Cruz, is waiting for you to greet you. Over to our principal.
Good morning to all.
Good morning, ma'am.
I'm extremely happy to see that Postgraduate Department of English, St. Paul's College, Kalamashiri, is organizing a webinar series from Elizabethan age to Edward side. Today's resource person is Dr. Rajeshwari Nair, Assistant Professor, School of Letters, IMG University. He is going to speak on the topic post-colonial studies, contests, and debates. I wish all the very best to the speaker, organizers, and participants. Thank you all.
Let's welcome
Thank you, ma'am.
Ms. Maria Matthew, faculty of this college, for the welcome speech.
Hello, sorry again. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. So today I'm extremely pleased to welcome a very special guest, Dr. Rajesh V. Nair from the Department of English, School of Letters. He is a scholar with an impeccable academic record. So he is right now serving as an assistant professor in the Department of English in School of Letters, MG University campus. He is known for his expertise in the field of life writing, which actually got reflected in his PhD thesis where he dealt with selected biographies of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. So, after his graduation from Mahatma Gandhi University, he pursued his post-graduation in English language and literature from the University of Hyderabad. And afterwards, he had the good fortune to become part of magnanimous institutions such as the Maharaja's College, the Government Sanskrit College, and also TMJM College. So today he's here with us to share his expert opinion on the topic post-colonial studies. So I would recommend you to actually not just to listen to his lecture, but to go and grab a piece of paper and pen and take down notes because the kind of information that he's about to share is indeed valuable and it is worth it. So right now I would want you to help me welcome him in onto this webinar. We welcome you, sir.
Good morning, all. Can you hear me?
Good morning, sir.
Okay. Uh, so a very warm good morning to all respected principal, other teachers of St. Paul's College, participants from all over India, research scholars, teachers, students. So once again, a very warm good morning to all of you. I hope that I am audible, right? Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Yes,
Uh,
sir.
so with the expectation that I am audible, let me begin my presentation. The topic for us to discuss today. Yesterday, my friend, my friend Lakshmi was dealing with Indian drama. So, just for as a change, let's discuss an area which is theoretical in nature. So the topic which we are going to discuss is broadly titled Post-Colonial Studies, Contexts and Debates. So for the sake of convenience, I hope that I have enough time to cover such a vast area. So, but I shall try my level best to limit uh, my presentation to the specific points. So for the sake of, uh, uh, focus rather, I would like to divide my presentation into 6 different sections. So let me introduce the 6 sections at the beginning. So I would like to begin with a very brief introduction, which consists of 4 or 5 important questions. And subsequently, I shall try to answer the questions in course of my presentation. Secondly, after giving you the introduction, I would like to explore the history and evolution of post-colonial studies. Uh, the third section, writing back to the center. Uh, the fourth section, post-colonialism and globalization. And section 5, post-colonialism and beyond. That's very important. And I would like to conclude the sixth session will be a conclusion uh, with a few important observations. So let's begin with a very brief introduction. So I have got, as I have already pointed out, um, I have got some 4 or 5 important questions. So let me begin with the first question. What exactly is post-colonialism? Are we still in the post-colonial phase? Right. Is post-colonialism a uniform theory? Right. How do we make sense of post-colonialism in the era of globalization? What will be the future of post-colonialism in the post-COVID era? Right. So the context has changed a lot. So we all know the context with which we are passing through. Okay. I am amused to see so many seminars with the topic post-COVID literature. So we haven't completely recovered from COVID, but still we are thinking about post-COVID situation. Okay, let's be positive, right? So a different context through which we are passing through. So what will be the future of post-colonial studies in this present context? So these are the questions which we have to think seriously about. So if you ask me what is post-colonialism or what exactly is post-colonial theory, I would say post-colonialism is a radical strategy. I would like to emphasize the word radical. So it's a radical strategy of one, writing. And we all know about post-colonial literature, writing back to the center. So a strategy of writing back to the center, right? That is one, writing. Secondly, it's also a radical strategy of reading. Okay, so post-colonialism is a kind of rereading the text from the angle of there are two, there are two parties. We talk about the binary, the colonizer and the colonized. So post-colonialism essentially is a kind of reading strategy, reading of text from the angle of the colonized, not from the colonized. So there is one person who is powerful, a master, and the slave. Right. So when we give post-colonial reading, we read from the angle of the colonized. We have the famous example, Prospero on one hand, and Caliban. Okay. So we read the Tempest from the perspective of Caliban. So with that, let me move on to the second section, that is um, history and evolution. So keep all these questions in your mind. Right? So it's all about post-colonialism. Is all about the politics of representation. Uh, During the colonial period, writings were from the angle, from the perspective of the colonizer. So when we come to the post-colonial phase, the angle has changed. That is why we come across the famous expression, empire writes back. So the center has changed. So who was at the center? The colonizer was at the center. So subsequently, when almost all countries got independence from different colonial nations, they started writing back. The so-called marginalized or subaltern communities or peoples across the world, especially in third world countries. So they started writing back the shift. You can see a power shift, right? So when you talk about the history and evolution, so there is no need to tell you that post-colonialism is a very important component in the syllabi of many universities, almost all universities. And in fact, there are separate papers um, uh, devoted to post-colonial literature. So it's very important for us to know the details of post-colonial studies. Uh, so we should be very careful in the sense that we should also think about the recent context, the phase of globalization or post-national phase. Yes, so so it's a very important concept, and I'm sure that many students are worried about theory. I was also worried about theory, and still to a certain extent. So the point is that there is no problem with theory. The problem is with the abuse of theory, I would say. So we all have the tendency to use theory very often outside the context. Okay. So when you read a text or when you apply a particular theory in reading a text, so the problem happens there. So it's also very important to simplify the theoretical concepts. So many theories are quite difficult to understand. So simplifying the theoretical concepts um, uh, it's very important for teachers as well as students. Right? Okay, coming to the history and evolution of post-colonialism. Right. Uh, I draw your attention to 19th century, which was a period of industrial revolution, and subsequently, the evolution of imperialism. And I invite your attention to the famous poem by Tennyson, Ulysses. There is already a post-colonial reading of Ulysses. Ulysses as an explorer, as an archetype of colonizer. So we can see the evolution of imperialism towards the second half of 19th century, and we come across very important colonial nations such as Great Britain. Okay, Great Britain, France, Portugal, Spain, and some other countries. But more importantly, Great Britain, colonized large portion of earth, and we know the expression such as the land, the sun never. It was a place where sun never set. Right? The face of colonialism in the late 19th century, and subsequently, many countries came under the rule of these nations, and the gradual evolution of freedom movements in almost all countries. And by 1940s and 1950s, majority of countries they secured independence. And after that, we can see the development of post-colonial um, uh, literature. So we come to the colonial post-colonial phase. So from colonial phase to post-colonial phase. Okay. So when we talk about colonialism, I would say there are essentially three dimensions of colonialism. The first dimension, political dimension. It was very clear during 19th and early 20th century. So big nations such as England, France, and Spain, they started, dominating, or they started controlling the territories, the physical territories of nations, including India, right? So the political dimension of colonialism, the physical dimension of colonialism was very, very clear. Right? The second important dimension of colonialism was economic. Okay. And we know the context where the East India Company started in India. So the economic colonization. And the third important dimension is cultural. So the cultural imperialism. Edward Said wrote a very important work with the title Cultural Imperialism. So imperialism and colonialism has got three important dimensions. So during the 19th and 20th centuries, early 20th centuries, we could see the political and physical dimension as more prominent. But now, remember, I asked or I raised a question at the beginning: are we still in a post-colonial phase? But many people agree to disagree with the fact that we are already in a post-colonial phase. So, their main argument is that we are still in a phase of colonialism with a new brand or with a new dimension. So they talk about neocolonization of the world. So they equate globalization with neocolonization. Right? So we are still in a neocolonial phase. So globalization is an indirect way of controlling the world. So that's the argument of some important critics, right? So if we take that into consideration, that point into consideration, then we can say that now the new form of colonization is more economic and cultural rather than physical or political. We don't see many countries conquering other countries and occupying the territories, right? And of course, there are some exceptions such as China, right? So the cultural colonization and the economic colonization of the world is taking place, right? So that's the point. These are the three important dimensions which we have to be very clear at the beginning, right? So when we talk about the post-colonial phase, that means the period after the independence of many countries, including India. So we can see the era of decolonization or post-colonial phase. And we can see the emergence of what we call, in the past, it was, in late 80s or early 80s period, we all come across the expression Commonwealth literature. So we can see so many writings emerging from, the erstwhile colonies, and Commonwealth literature was very important course paper. I remember studying a paper on Commonwealth literature. So Commonwealth, those countries which were the former colonies of Britain, and the writings from these countries were included as a paper in many syllabi across India. So Commonwealth literature. So some people raised the problem with the term Commonwealth. So those countries who got independence, they are still, it gives the term gives the implication that they have been completely decolonized. Okay. Their minds. Okay, to borrow an expression from Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Right. So that's why we can find a shift from Commonwealth literature to post-colonial literature. The term has changed. We can see a change in the terminology. Right? So since 1980s, we can see we come across the term post-colonial literature, from Commonwealth literature to post-colonial literature. So that's a point which we have to remember. So in 1970s, in 1980s period, during that decade, that decade is very crucial in the evolution of post-colonial studies. So we come across so many crucial works, emerging during that period. There's the Empire Writes Back, then Anderson's Imagined Communities, so many cultural imperialism, uh, cultural imperialism, and so many crucial works emerged during that period. And we can see so many theoreticians emerging during that period. Though Orientalism by Edward Said came out in 1978, Edward Said, played a very important role in the emergence of post-colonial theory. So we have so many important theoreticians such as Edward Said, Franz Fanon, Homi Bhabha, Gayatri Spivak, Bill Ashcroft, of course, Helen Tiffin, Garrett Griffiths, and I should not forget to mention the name Robert Young. So Robert Young, Leela Gandhi, of course. So Ania Lumba. So many theoreticians, so many academicians, and so many theoreticians, they started thinking about the possibility of evolving a theory of post-colonialism. And subsequently, we can see post-colonialism emerging as a theory, an approach. And here I would like to quote Robert Young. So according to Robert Young, post-colonialism is a kind of re-examining the history of colonialism. This theory, the aim of post-colonialism is to re-examine the history of colonialism from the perspective of the colonized. That's a point which I mentioned at the beginning. So re-examining the history of colonialism from the perspective of the colonized. So the shift of perspective from the colonizer and the colonized. So that's a point, right? So gradually we can see so many crucial works in 1980s and 1990s, early 1990s also. We have got the important work Nation and Narration by Homi Bhabha, another work Location of Culture. So post-colonial literature, Partha Chatterjee's contribution, Ashish Nandi as a very important thinker. So people have started, the so-called academics, the so-called intellectuals, they have started contributing to this field. As a result, we can see the emergence of this post-colonialism. Post-colonialism is a very important component of the syllabi in the universities in 90s period. And I remember we can see a boom in research in post-colonial studies. So many students, so many researchers, they took interest in applying post-colonial theory in reading different works by different writers, right? We can see different aspects of post-colonial theory. So I shall be very brief. I'm sure that most of you are aware of points, many points which I am sharing with you. Right? So post-colonialism and race is very important. So if you connect race with post-colonialism, race and ethnicity, and we have the important contribution by Franz Fanon, and Fanon wrote two important works. One is Black Skin and White Mass, and the second one is the, the Grapes of sorry, not sorry, The Wretched of the Earth, the Wretched of the Earth. So two important works by Franz Fanon. So Fanon, he analyzed the psychological effect of colonialism on blacks, especially in that work, Black Skin. It's a very important work, Black Skin and White Mass. So race and ethnicity was analyzed by Franz Fanon. So when it comes to gender, we have the most important contribution by Gayatri Spivak. And I'm sure that many students studied basic and the subalterns. So Gayatri Spivak, she focused on the gender aspect of post-colonialism to her practice. And how the famous example of Bhuvaneshwari Gandhi, how she revived that character was forgotten in many writings. And I should not. It would be an injustice if I don't mention the contribution of Edward Said. So Edward Said was a starting point. We all know that. So Edward Said's 1978 work, Paulianism, very important in the sense that he set a very important platform for future studies in post-colonial literature. And he talked about the binary Orient and the Occident, East and the West, and how Orient is represented as inferior, as the Orient is violent, inferior, hostile. So all the negative attributes were given to the Orient. How the West looked at the East, how the West represented the East through different narratives, including travelogues, photographs, colonial photographs, of course, novels, etc., etc. So through different narratives, how the West gave a distorted or unfair, rather unfair representation of the East. So Edward Said's contribution cannot be neglected at all. So when we talk about post-colonial studies, another very important portion which we should always remember is nation. So nation as an imaginary construct. So here, Benedict Anderson's contribution is very crucial. So Benedict Anderson imagined communities. Very often we are confused between imaginary homelands and imagined communities. The title is similar, right? So this imagined communities, Benedict Anderson's work. This work came out in 1983, in 1983, right? In 1983, this Anderson proposed a very important theory. Nation is an imaginary construct, and nation is constructed through different narratives. I still remember the originality of his thinking. So there is a separate chapter on senses, how senses played a very important role in imagining a nation. So nation is imagined through different narratives, and rituals, including this Republic Day parade, national anthem. So through different narratives, including history, different forms of literature. So we all know about the witness. So nation is imagined. So when you imagine a nation, of course there will be politics of representation, and you have an agenda. You will have an agenda when you imagine a nation. So that's a very important work by Anderson. And he also talks about map making, cartography. So cartography is also a very important mode of narrating a nation. Right? So nation making is very important. And when you talk about nation making, um, I'll give you another interesting example. So we all know about the biggest statue in the world, the Statue of Unity by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. So there are friends from Maharashtra. They can easily, uh, understand. So what's the role of a statue? What is the role of a Statue of Unity? So statue making as a politics. So it's a mode of, it's also a kind of narrative, right? Statue narrates something. So the Iron Man of India. So the statue of Patel, when you visit the statue of, when you visit that place, and when you look at the statue, you can see the statue silently tells you so many things, and you are reminded of the contribution of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel in uniting the princely states, in annexing the princely states. So statue making is also a political activity. So that itself is a kind of is a mode of imagining nation, and there's no point in telling you that that very act of making the statue of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel has got an agenda behind that. So in a way, it has eclipsed, rather eclipsed uh, the contribution of Mahatma Gandhi to the formation of or to the making of India, right? So we come across different narratives which imagine nation, um, right? Including films. Okay, we all know about the famous film Roja, right? So there are different narratives which imagine nation. So Anderson's contribution is very important here. So when we come to the third important section, that is writing back to the center, right? So this is actually based on the work The Empire Writes Back, a very crucial work which came out in 1989. Yes. The Empire Writes Back. It was published by three important authors: Bill Ashcroft, Gareth Griffiths, and Helen Tiffin. And this work came out in 1989. And in the same year, we come across another important work by Gauri Vishwanathan, Mass of Conquest. So, um, Bill Ashcroft and his fellow authors, so they proposed an agenda in that very crucial work, The Empire Writes Back. And let me give you some two or three important points. Um, they highlight the politics of English, the coming of English, and the politics of language. Right. So here, a very important point we have to keep in mind when we analyze post-colonial literature, post-colonial literatures, post-colonial literatures. We use it in the plural sense. Because there is diversity cutting across nations. So there is politics of language, and we all know about the context by which English was introduced. The English system of education was introduced in India, and we know about Macaulay's famous minutes. The politics of language. So a foreign language was imposed in a nation which was under the control, which was under the rule of British. Um, So the politics of nation, sorry, the politics of language. So language was imposed to make a group of, or to train a group of people, um, so that they become cultured, rather than barbarous. So to teach them a set of morals, set of values, so that they become cultured. Okay. So that was the agenda of introducing this English system of education. We have the most important work by Gauri Vishwanathan, Mass of Conquest. So in which that work she explores the politics of the introduction of English in the Indian context. So language has power. So English, when it was introduced, had the power over the colonized. I am reminded of the famous statement by Caliban in The Tempest. So Caliban gave a reply to Miranda. You taught me the language, and the profit on it is I know how to pace. So English became a language of empowerment of the colonized. So the establishment of universities, the foundation of universities in India, University of Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay, and slow and steady emergence of English educated Indians in the Indian context, and we have those who are from West Bengal. If somebody is there in this conference room, they know about the contribution of Henry de Rosio and his followers. So this establishment of universities and schools, that's very important. In the Kerala context, let me give you the example of convent schools. So convent schools were established with an agenda, right? To discipline the students, to give training to girls, to teach them morals, to give them certain values so that they become future, so that they will become good future, housewives or mothers. So there's a connection between the making of female subjectivity, the mode of constructing female subjectivity with the help of convent schools. I'm not making a negative comment, but if you analyze the politics of convent education, think about the simple mechanism that is uniform. So uniform was introduced as a uniform was introduced as a uh, mechanism to discipline the body, to control the body, to teach certain, to teach discipline, to teach certain values, set values, so that they will get training to become good citizens, good housewives, good mothers in future. So it is closely linked with female subjectivity, the formation of female subjectivity, right? Okay, so coming back to the politics of language. So when we talk about the politics of language, a very important component in many post-colonial writings is the post-colonial dilemma. So writers face a particular kind of dilemma, uh, whether to use the language of the colonizer or not. So they had the choice of not using the language of the colonizer or using the language. So they were confused. So this conflict and this dilemma is very clear in so many writings. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is a poem by the African writer, Caribbean writer, Derek Walcott. So Derek, if you look at the poem "A Far Cry from Africa," the famous poem, which you have read or studied. So a far cry from Africa. In that poem, the poet talks about the violence. Corpses are scattered on the land. The gorilla wrestles with the Superman. The gorilla wrestles with the Superman, the conflict with the colonizer and the colonized. Then at the end, towards the end of the poem, um, he expresses his helplessness, divided in the vein. The poet is divided. The poet is divided. The poet is confused whether to use the language of the colonized. I'll give another example. The famous poem by Kamaladas, an introduction. I speak. I use three languages. I speak three languages, write in two, dream in one. The language I speak becomes mine, mine alone, right? So the quotation goes on like that. So the post you can see the post-colonial writers justifying the use of language, and in the at the back of their mind they have this confusion whether to use. Is it ethically right to use the language? This dilemma is conflict. This dilemma and this conflict is apparent in many post-colonial writings. And I'm also reminded of the work, Colonizing the Mind by Nkugi. So he took a different radical or extreme step, and he stopped writing in English, and he returned to his local language, Gikuyu, right? And he also wrote a very important essay on the abolition of English departments. So he stopped writing in English. So you have the choice whether to use the language, but the conflict is there. Okay. So, so writing back to the center, that work deals with two or three very important points. Drive home two or three important points. So that work highlights the importance of using different Englishes. E small letter, not capital letter. So the English language has to be, the syntax of the language has to be broken. The radical act, the act of resistance. So it's a kind of resistance. But what is resistance? The act of breaking the syntax of English language by using different Englishes, by including local dialects, idioms, etc. So you can use the language of the colonizer, but you can deconstruct the language of the colonizer, and that becomes a radical act. And I'm sure that there are so many friends from outside Kerala, but those who are from Kerala, they know a very important activist in Kerala, C.K. Janu. C.K. Janu she's a tribal leader. She's an activist. She wrote a very important work, her autobiography, Mother Forest. So C.K. Janu's autobiography, Mother Forest, if you look at that work, those who have read that autobiography, they know that the narrator uses a special kind of English, in the sense that at the beginning of every paragraph, there is no capital letter. The first word begins with a small letter. The spellings are distorted. The so-called rules of grammar, English grammar, are broken. It's a radical act. So in that sense, that becomes a very peculiar kind of life narrative. So how a post-colonial activist um, writes back to the center by using the same language of the colonizer. Okay. And here, let me introduce another point. I would like to contradict myself. I'd like to challenge myself. Where do we locate tribal writings? Can we consider tribal narratives or tribal writings as post-colonial writings? Because they also face a problem with the mainstream society. Okay, C.K. Janu uses the word civil society. How the tribals in Wayanad, how they were exploited by the mainstream civil society, to which we are a part of. To which we are a part. So, how civil society exploits the tribals or Adivasis, Vanavasis. So they face colonization from the mainstream society. They face the women, tribal women. They face suppression from their own men. C.K. Janu also talks about the patriarchal system within the tribal community. You can see the double colonization here. And on the third level, think about the colonization from outside. Okay, so where do we locate these native writings or indigenous writings or ethnic writings? That's really a problematic issue in the entire corpus of post-colonial writings. So post-colonialism. So according to this Ashcroft and others, so we had to deconstruct the language. Right? Secondly, uh, they tend to universalize the experiences of the colonized nations. That's a problem with that work. They tend to universalize the colonial experiences of different nations. They're different, of course. They're different. So it is illogical to universalize the experiences of the colonized nations. Whether the case of Okonko in Things Fall Apart, or some other work in the Indian context. Okay, so we should always think about the diversity. We should always think about the diversity in diversities within the post-colonial literatures. Um, right. Um, so on the whole, post-colonial writings rewrite or try to reconstruct identity or subjectivity. I use the word reconstruct because the identity was lost, it was suppressed during the colonial period. So it's a kind of rewriting or reconstructing one's identity or something. So post-colonialism has got another dimension in the sense that we know about canon, CANON. So canon formation. Canon, there are mainly two types of canon. One is the formation of or making of anthologies. Anthologization, anthologies. We have the Norton anthology, anthology of American literature, anthology of women's writing in India, anthology of post-colonial writings, etc., etc. Okay. Anthology making is a mode of canon formation. You include some writers and their works. So when you include certain writers and their works, obviously you exclude some authors. So there is politics in inclusion and exclusion, right? And obviously you cannot include all the writers. But when you pick certain writer by omitting some other writer, there has to be logic, and you have an agenda. You have a politics in excluding someone, right? So one mode is of canon formation is anthology making. The second mode is the making of syllabus. Syllabus making is not an innocuous, not a simple or innocent activity. Okay, when you design the syllabus of uh, graduates or postgraduates, you think about the possible papers to be included in the semesters. Okay, so before 1980s period, when during 1980s period, the syllabus was mainly Western oriented. Was mainly Western oriented, and we could never imagine studying a paper on Indian writing in English in 1980s, or Dalit writing, or Indian writing in English translation as a paper, right? So syllabus was essentially Western oriented, but subsequently we can see so many changes happening in the academic field also. The syllabus was deconstructed, the traditional canon was deconstructed, and we can see the inclusion of so many papers, including gender studies, right? Gender studies. And here we have in the university I offer a course on autobiography. So we can think of different papers, including post-colonial literature. And you have post-colonial drama, you have post-colonial poetry as separate papers. So the traditional syllabus was broken. So post-colonialism is also a mode of breaking the canon. That's the point which I was trying to make. So the traditional canon formation the politics of traditional canon formation was subverted by the post-colonial that's a point. And coming to the section 4, that is post-colonialism and globalization. This is very, very important. We can see in the 1950s or 60s or 70s period, we can see the emergence of the post-colonial literature or literatures. Different writers they started writing about the experiences faced by the third world countries which were former colonies. And we have the important work by Salman Rushdie, witness children, followed by so many writers. We have Amita Ghosh and we have Balaki. So we have different writers. But when we come to 1990s period, when we come to late 1980s or early 90s period, the world changed further. We come across the phase of digital revolution, DR, digital revolution. Uh, we come across the phase of liberalization when P.V. Narasimha was the Prime Minister of India. Manmohan Singh became the finance minister, and we can see the evolution of a new phase. I remember hearing about the liberalization. So we can see the emergence of globalization. So the boundaries of nation, they are no more relevant. That kind of feeling. Okay. So when we come to 2000 period or 2010 or 20, so are our boundaries still relevant? That's a very, very important point. Can we close our boundaries without interacting with or without communicating with other nations in the world? So that's why I mentioned digital revolution. Think about cyberspace. Cyberspace has no borders. So now we talk about network society. So Manuel Castells, okay, the cyber theorist Manuel Castells, he uses the term network society. We are connected. We are closely connected with each other. So we can easily send a friend request to a person in US. You can easily communicate with anyone living in any part of the world. So the boundaries of nation, they are not crossed properly nowadays. We use the word porous. Boundaries are porous nowadays because we cannot totally lead a secluded life, right? So, and cyberspace, has no borders, right? So we can see the blurring of boundaries, and some use the term post-nationalism. Nation is no more relevant, and now we are in a phase of post-nationalism. Post means after. Right? So nation state is no more relevant. That kind of idea. And here you should remember the contribution of Arjuna Padre. So Padre talks about flows, FLOWS, flow of technology, flow of people. People are easily crossing borders, and there is trade happening everywhere, whether it is in the form of a gold smuggling. So trade is happening everywhere, right? So we cannot survive by shutting our doors against another nation. So we have stopped using the applications of China. But how far can we resist that? That's a problem. So we are bound by international agreements. So there is mutual give and take. So it's very, very complicated, right? So this post national phase is very, very important. So post colonialism has crossed so many phases since 1990s period. So when we come to the fifth section, that is post-colonialism and beyond. I shall try to sum up very soon. It's almost 1 hour. So post-colonialism and beyond. There's a question mark after that. Post-colonialism and beyond. So see, since 2000, we can see the evolution of another development that is called transculturalism. We talk about transculturalism, transnationalism. Um, so what exactly is that? But before that, let me give you the point. Then I shall explain transculturalism. And you know, uh, during the colonial period, we we read a text from the angle of the colonizer representing the colonized. When we come to the post-colonial phase, the former colonized or the post-colonial subject started narrating a text from the angle of the post-colonial subject, not from the angle of the colonizer. So here, in the colonial phase as well as the post-colonial phase, what we can see is the shift of power. Right? The power is shifted. The center is shifted. One person replacing another person in the center. Right? The space of the center is shifted. So when we come to the phase, transcultural phase, especially it's a development, recent development, relatively recent development since 2000 or so. In the transcultural phase, what we can see is uh, instead of shifting the power center, why can't we arrive at a consensus? In the sense that now we talk about cultural negotiation. So why can't we negotiate our cultures? Why can't we exchange our cultures? So there is no point in saying that my culture is superior and your culture is inferior. So let us discuss. Let us sit. Let's put our heads together. Let's sit together and let's interact. And we talk about let us negotiate our cultures. Let us transact our cultures on a common ground, right? Cultural transactions and cultural negotiations. And here, power struggle does not figure. I don't know whether it is possible or not. So this is a trend which is slowly emerging, and that's why in many foreign universities we can see the emergence of Center for Transcultural Studies. Center for Transcultural Studies. And coming to the question which I raised at the beginning, so how do we think about um, post-colonialism in the COVID phase, COVID-19 pandemic phase? Has the pandemic brought back the importance of boundaries? So, Prime Minister of India uh, declared, and he declared the starting of what we call Atmanirbhar Bharat. So Atmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India. So that is that was the phrase, catch phrase introduced by our own Prime Minister. So can we be self-reliant by shutting our borders? Okay. Can we close our national borders and can we be self-reliant? That's the question. If you ask me the question, my answer would be the opposite. I would say pandemic has opened the boundaries. Pandemic has made the boundaries of nations irrelevant. It is a global phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon. And we look to America, we look to India, we look to Germany, or we look to England for coming vaccines. Let somebody let somebody introduce the vaccine so that the entire world is saved. Okay. So pandemic has, in a way, I would say, challenged the construct post-colonialism, right? By making it universal. Cannot be ourselves, and we have to, we are a networked world. We talk about globalization, global village. So we are a part of the world. So it's a common problem suffered by people across the world. Okay, so let me conclude with two or three important observations. Right? Is post-colonialism a theory? I would say is an umbrella term. It's an umbrella term uh, in which we make use of different theoretical approaches. So different theoretical approaches are used in reading a text in a post-colonial angle. So when you give a post-colonial reading of a text, you make use of different theories depending on a text. That's very important. So depending on a text, you give different readings. So here you can, when you get a text in which gender is very important, so you can connect feminism with the post-colonialism. So when you get a text in which um, you know this race is important, okay, then you can connect ethnic studies and post-colonialism. When you get a text in which caste is very important, okay, the text in which caste is very important, then, okay, very important. So you can connect caste with post-colonialism. Same is the case with the class. So different Marxism you can connect post-colonialism to Marxism, then eco-criticism. If you are studying the ecological aspect of a text, then that's very important. So I'll give an example. There's an emerging area of study that is called waste studies. WASTE, waste studies. It is also called garbage aesthetics. What about garbage? So we can see how waste is represented in literature. How waste is represented in literature. In so many words, waste is represented. Uh, Waste has got different dimensions. I shall give you two dimensions. One is the material dimension. And there is a very important American poet who wrote an interesting poem, The Red Wheelbarrow. Okay, so much depends upon a red wheelbarrow, laced with rainwater beside the white chickens. Right. So it's a short poem. It's an imagist poem by William Carlos Williams. So how the wheelbarrow is out of use. So wheelbarrow represents agrarian civilization. So with the advent of industrial civilization, or with the advent of industrial revolution, with the mechanism, with the coming of machines, this red wheelbarrow has become out of use. So the material dimension of waste, and secondly, human dimension. So human beings as waste, and here we have uh, refugees, migrants, refugees. So how refugees are treated in literature? They are the waste. They are the sediments in society. Okay. So, so the point which I was trying to make is that so we can connect post-colonialism with the different realms. Okay. It's not a uniform. It's an umbrella term. It's a broad term, but the perspective is same. You read a text from the perspective of the subaltern or the marginalized. That's a common. Secondly, um, if you look at the theories of post-colonial studies, whether it is Barba, Gayatri Spivak, Arjuna Padure, Ashish Nandi, Gauri Vishwanathan, etc., etc. You can see one thing in common. And all these thinkers, all these theoreticians, or all these post-colonial intellectuals, all these post-colonial intellectuals, they are Western oriented. They were they were educated in England, not England, not essentially in England. They were educated in the West, so they were Western educated, Western oriented intellectuals, and obviously their theoretical ideas, they have a Eurocentric bias. Maybe yes, to some extent, there is Eurocentric bias um, uh, in their arguments, many of the arguments. Okay, my point is, um, is it possible for us to explore post-colonialism from within by evolving our own indigenous theoretical tools? That's the point. So can we explore post-colonialism, or can we develop post-colonialism by evolving our own indigenous theoretical analysis? So that I think, as far as I'm concerned, that should be our target. But still we are using it because there is no other way. So it's very important. But let me give you a couple of important names who have contributed to this field. One important name is M.S.S. Pandian. Friends from Delhi, they know M.S.S. Pandian. He was a professor of history in JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is no more. Okay. So he contributed a lot by evolving indigenous theoretical tools in reading post-colonial texts. I'll give you one example. Two important works by M.S.S. Pandian. One is the image trap. Image trap. So it's a study of MGR, M.G. Ramachandran. So he was analyzing that work. He was analyzing the contribution of Dravidian movement in Tamil Nadu. Most of his studies are based on Tamil culture, right? Second important work came out posthumously. That work, it was published by his wife recently. The title of the work is very important: The Strangeness of Tamil Nadu. The Strangeness of Tamil Nadu. I think you should all read that work. It's a collection of articles by M.S. Pandey, in which he explores so many important topics, including Rajinikanth. There's a very interesting analysis of Veerappan. Okay. There's a very interesting analysis of Veerappan in that work. There's an essay on Rajinikanth, Tamil politics. It's a collection of essays and articles published by him in different journals, including Economic and Political Survey. So one is M.S.S. Pandya. The second important contributor, which you might not have heard, I'm not being presumptuous, but it's a very important name. I think I should acknowledge his name at least in the context. If you analyze the Subaltern Studies Collective, so Subaltern Studies Group, headed by uh, Ranajit Guha, Dipesh Chakrabarti, so many important historians. Um, uh, they, they formed a collective called Subaltern Studies Collective in 1980s period. That's also very important in the context of post-colonial studies. So Subaltern Studies Collective, they started writing the history of India from the context of the subaltern or the marginalized. Okay, as against the mainstream histories, they started looking at the histories of India from the angle of the subalterns. That's why they one history is about the contribution of Northeast Hill tribes. So there are 12, I think 12 or 13 volumes of subaltern studies collective came out. Interestingly, if you look at the collective, the members who wrote the histories, they were all Western educated. There is no harm in being Western educated. I'm not saying that, But you can see a politics uh, in that collective. They have not addressed the issue of caste. I repeat, they have not addressed the issue of caste. They have not written anything on. There are so many subalterns. We cannot. You cannot categorize subalterns under the rubric class, CLASs. So they were Marxist. So this is historians. They were Marxist oriented. That's why they focused mainly on class. But they never looked beyond caste. Sorry, they never looked beyond class. They omitted issues such as caste, they omitted issues such as gender, etc. So if you look at the 12, 13 volumes, you can see that. My point is the second important person I can mention is one Thankappan Nair. So Thankappan Nair, he's a Malayali. Uh, he's from Aluva. Uh, After completing his schooling, he went to Calcutta. It's an interesting incident. He went to Calcutta and he passed degree and subsequently LLB. And he got a job as a clerk in Calcutta University Library, not University Library, public library, suppose public library. And he started writing the history of Calcutta. And he wrote 61 books, and the 62nd book is already going to come out. And the 62nd book is on Gandhi and Calcutta. That book is titled Gandhi and Calcutta. And this person is an amazing scholar, and this person is not represented in any of the 12 volumes by Ranajit Guha and his intellectuals in the West. So if you look at the titles of Thankappan Nair's works, you can Google it later. Very interesting. Street of Calcutta. One book is titled "The Street of Calcutta." He wrote about the people, the people who were homeless. They had to stay in the streets, and he wrote about so many aspects. He wrote about post office, the history of post office in Calcutta, and he wrote about the history of colonial or imperial Calcutta. So altogether, he wrote 61 books. And now he's taking rest in Aliwa. He has come back, and he had a huge collection of books, rare books, archives in his house. And Oxford University approached him for that, and they gave him. It is believed that they gave him a blank check. You can write any amount, but we want your rare documents. But he said no, and instead of writing the amount in the blank check, and he donated all his rare documents and archives to Calcutta Library. So there are historians, there are scholars in the real sense who are not visible in the post-colonial studies context. So that's the politics of this, academics, I would say. So I gave you two examples there. So coming back to the last point, when we talk about post-colonialism, we cannot ignore the aspect of translation. So translation is a very, very important act, a very important practice. And there is a very important work titled Post-Colonial Translation, edited by Harish Trivedi and Susan Bassett. And Gayatri Spivak wrote an essay, Post-Colonial Translation. So translation as an activity is an act of resistance, as a practice of resistance. If you translate a work from your native culture, you are writing back to the center. You are asserting that here I have got my own culture. I am proud of my culture. You read my text written in English so that you can understand. So translation is a mode of writing back to the center. So in the entire gamut of post-colonial studies, translation is a very, very important component. And one last point which I missed is in the field of post-colonial writings, diasporic studies is very, very important. So diaspora, scattered. Diaspora means technically means scattered. So there are so many writers who write about India while staying abroad. So diasporic writings invariably talk about or discuss the issue of identity, the issue of rootlessness, and we have the example of namesake by Jubalaki. So diasporic writings also come under the rubric of post-colonial literature. So, what I was trying to tell you in the last 1 hour was that post-colonialism is a very broad category. When we talk about post-colonial literature, we have to be very clear about the recent context also. The context is changing very soon, and we have to think about what will happen in the post-COVID era. So the debates are going on depending on the context. So the early post-colonial phase, or the phase of globalization, or the phase of transculturalism, or the phase of the pandemic. Okay. So we have to keep on rethinking. We have to keep on rereading the text, and we have to decode the encoded, what we call the encoded ideology in the text. And I should use the word narrative. So there are different narratives, whether in the form of films, whether in the form of novels, whether in the form of poetry, whether in the form of visual text, such as photographs. I'm reminded of the analysis of Roland Barthes, a Negro soldier saluting the French flag. So whatever be the narratives, visual or verbal. So what is very important for us to uh, look into it, look into the intricacies of the text, and uh, and you try to make sense of the text by siding with the marginalized. So that's a very important step in the post-colonial studies, in the sense that it is ethically right. It is ethically right to side with the sufferer. You are with the Caliban, not with the prosperer, right? So you sympathize or empathize with the subaltern or the marginalized, and you try to make sense of the text, and you try to decode the politics, whether in the form of the novel or any other text. And let me conclude with one brief point, which requires elaboration. Okay, but I am not going to elaborate much. That is food. So food is very, very important in post-colonial literature. And my friends, how food is very important in works such as the namesake, or Benjamin's the goat days. So food is very important. It's a signifier. It's a sign, and you feel at home when you cook food. You're on native food. That's why Ashima Ganguly feels at home in US when she prepares Bengali food. So food is a very important component. So you try to make sense, or you try to be at home, away from home. So diaspora studies is also very, very important. So I started with the introduction by giving a few questions. I hope that I have answered almost all questions. Then I tried to explain the historical evolution of post-colonial studies, starting with colonial phase and post-colonial and novel phase. Then I tried to explain the politics of representation, the politics of language in post-colonial writings. Then we discussed post-colonialism and globalization, the connection. Then the possibility of post-colonialism and beyond, right? And I concluded with the 3 or 4 observations, I suppose. Thank you very much for your patient listening. I'm sure that I exceeded my time. So it's time for us to have a good discussion. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Rajesh, for sharing your profound knowledge. I do not know how to express my gratitude to you. Really, we appreciate you for your powerful words. Whatever it may be, it is time to conclude. Let's welcome Divida Benny for vote of thanks.
Good morning, all. It is my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. On behalf of Department of English of St. Paul's College, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to those who have directly and indirectly contributed to this webinar on post-colonial studies, context and debate organized by our institute. At the outset, I'd like to thank our chief guest, Dr. Rajesh V. Nair, who has shed some light on the topic post-colonialism. He also said that post-colonial literature is simply the rereading of a text on the perspective of colonized. How could someone explain such a vast theory in its peak of its brevity? We are really enlightened with your knowledge and your presence. Thank you, sir. I would also like to thank our principal, Valentina De Cruz, for her enthusiastic support. A special thanks to the organizing committee and our beloved teachers for their unflinching support and coordination. Our heartfelt thanks to our students and all the participants for their active participation. With this, we move to the end of today's webinar. Thank you.
So thank you very much, all of you.